My mother used to say, "We don't use no fucking tablespoons with it."
Yeah, so was your dad always handy?
My dad?
Yeah, can you tell
No,
me yeah, tell
no,
me
my dad's not Indian. He's not. I mean, he was a lot handier than I am. But he was not the kind of guy to be like fixing. My dad always had a project, and he was always working on something. Um, I don't know if I would describe my dad as handy. Again, he's far more handy than me, and I think that's because he was raised by a bricklayer. His father, my
Oh, wow.
grandfather was, yeah, my grandfather was a blue collar, laborer, and that's the household my dad grew up in. My dad was a doctor, and
Oh,
so I kind of grew up, with the idea that like a big goal, I guess, for my dad was to be able to call and pay someone to do those things. That was kind of a
yeah.
mark of success for him in one way, all his metrics of success. And so, uh, yeah, no, I don't know if I would describe him, but he knows how to do things that men of his generation all know how to do. That I feel like men of our generation generally don't know how to do, like how to
Yeah.
fix a fan belt with a woman's what do they call them, pantyhose or whatever, stuff like that. Which I just think
Oh, so
that
he does know how to
that
do that? Or like
yeah, but I think
oh, wow.
everybody of his age, he's in his early 70s, he's 70. And, I
Okay.
just think that that's a generational thing that like, there's just a lot more knowledge back then of those things for a variety of reasons. I mean, I think computers have taken a lot of that off our plate, but also computers have helped us. So when my car breaks down on the side of the road, I could just look on my
Click.
phone and
Yeah,
yeah,
there
I
it
don't need
is.
to know that stuff. So I would say he was handier than me. I'm not. I mean, I can barely change a light bulb without a manual.
So where did you grow up? Or can you maybe start from the start? Where did you
Yeah, I was born in northern New Jersey, in Jersey City. And then when I was young, my parents moved down to the Jersey Shore. My dad had
Okay.
two job offers. One was in a town called Williamsport, Pennsylvania, which is known for the home of the Little League World Series and nothing, pretty much nothing else. And
Oh, okay.
the other job offer he had was in the Jersey Shore, which was a 90-minute drive from Jersey City, which is where all of my mother's family was. My father grew up just outside of Queens, in a little suburb on Long Island. So for them to be kind of that close to their families was super important. So I grew up in a little clamming village, in about halfway in between Asbury Park and Atlantic City, New Jersey, but right on the beach.
Okay.
Yeah, right at the
Oh,
edge of the
cool.
Pine Barrens. Yeah, it was like everything to our west for millions of acres was the Pine Barrens. People who don't know New Jersey have probably seen that episode of The Sopranos where Paulie and Christopher get lost in the woods chasing the Russian guy. That's the Pine Barrens, and then everything to our east was the Atlantic Ocean. So it
It's
was a cool place.
beautiful.
Yeah, and being a kid, I hated it, but now I realize what a special place it was to grow up. But everybody hates where they grow up. I feel like.
Yeah, definitely. So mom, dad, you have brothers, sisters? Was it just you? Like what?
No, I have an older sister. I have an older sister. She's 3 years older than me, and as does my wife. She has an older sister who's 3 years older than her. And now that we have two kids who are 3 years apart, it's funny to see the exact same dynamic. To see, oh, this is my sister. My son is my sister, and my daughter is me and my wife in a
Oh,
lot of
funny.
ways. And just like that whole first kid, second kid thing. But yeah, it was just the four of us.
That's
But we came
awesome.
from a big, big, big Italian American family, who, when I was a kid, we've since kind of fractured for a variety of reasons. But when I was a kid, my family was very, very close. So I grew up with dozens of cousins who very, very close with, and aunts and uncles, and big Sunday dinners, and the whole paisan thing.
Yeah, that's great. Did you so school, all that kind of stuff, like were you good in school or like how did you
No, no, I'm a lifelong C student. And it wasn't for lack of intelligence. I think I'm a pretty smart guy. But me and school don't. I mean, the only reason I finished college is to placate my mother. In fact, I dropped out of college for a while, and got a job at a gay bar in Philadelphia. And My mother was devastated, not because of the gay bar thing. I mean, she loved that. My parents
That's
were
funny.
always, very open and progressive people, but the fact that I dropped out, because my parents, they were second generation Americans, and they come from a very much an immigrant mindset. Which the reason my great grandparents emigrated from Italy was for their descendants to have an education. And so for
Right.
me to say, fuck that, I don't want to go to, it was not, when I was a kid, college, higher education was non-negotiable. Everything was negotiable when I was a kid. Do what you want, live your life, but like you have to go to college. End of story.
Yeah.
And so when I went to 3 colleges in and around the city of Philadelphia, it took 5 years just to get one bachelor's degree. Um, and pretty much, I said to my advisors, which I'm sure they love to hear, was like, what is the bare minimum I have to do to get out of here with the
Yeah.
degree?
Yeah.
But I didn't like it. And the funny thing now is that I teach at a university in Wake Forest, in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, Wake Forest University. It's full circle, and now I'm going back to college, which is a thing I said I would never do again.
That's hilarious. That's awesome. Do you, so what did you major? What was your major? What did you study?
I started as a film major at an art school, and then dropped out. Kind of, I was in the classes, and I was like, if I'm gonna do this, I wanted to be a filmmaker when I was younger. And I said, if I'm going to do this, I might as well. I mean, I'm wasting my parents. My parents paid for my college, which was another one of their dreams, was to be able to send their kids to school, to pay for it, because they had such mountains of, my parents grew up very limited means. And so it was, for them, it was like their dream as a couple was to send their kids to school without the weight of college, student loan
Right.
debts, etc. But I started as a film major, and then I dropped out, and I said, I could just go to Hollywood or go to New York City and get a job on a film set and learn more than I'm learning here, costing my parents all
Probably
this money.
true. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted a typical. I think one thing that I did find in college was that the value of a liberal arts education, and I wanted that. I wanted a typical college. I wanted a typical liberal arts education. Humanities, classics, rhetoric, that kind of stuff. And I ended up graduating with a degree in communications and a concentration in gender studies.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's very, very appropriate for the times that we're in today. Yeah. But so from there, like what, you just like, got a corporate job and just,
No, no, I actually graduated. No, I graduated. No, nothing in my life works
See,
like
a
that.
C student wouldn't be doing that. I expect more and better
No,
things coming out of
corporate.
you.
I actually moved to Rome right after I graduated from college because
Oh wow.
I graduated in 2006, right at the start of the recession, and nobody was hiring
Okay.
anybody with a liberal arts degree. And I figured if I'm going to be broke, I might as well go be broke somewhere cool. So I moved to Rome and lived in Rome for a while, and I planned to stay longer, but that was when my mother first got sick. So
Hmm.
came home, took care of her so that my father didn't have to retire early. Worked as her like kind of live-in nurse for I have no idea how long, maybe 6 or 8 months, at least through her first round of chemotherapy treatments. And then after that, she kicked me out. She was like, "Go start your life," like And I moved to Jersey City, got a job at a daily newspaper, and then did that for like a year, and then got a job at a record label called Matador Records and the Beggars Group. It's like
Oh
a
nice.
group of 4 record labels, just like my all-time favorite label and some of my all-time favorite. So it was like for me, a kid growing up, obsessed with indie rock. It was like playing for the Yankees.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I did that for
You
like the
just
next
kind of
10
glossed
years.
over. Yeah, you kind of glossed over Rome. Can you tell me what was that like? What did you do there? Like, how did? Yeah, what
I
was?
Yeah, no, I taught
Is
English
that
as a
where your
second.
heritage is from, or like
No,
like?
they're further south. They're from
Okay.
around Naples on my mother's side. My father's side is even further south of Naples.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I just, I planned to get my certification to teach English as a second language, and what I really dreamed of doing was moving to a place where I was the only American. I didn't want to live in Rome, I love Rome. I love Rome. I mean, I live in a college town now, but I'm very much a city guy. I don't like small towns. I don't like suburbs. I like big, bustling cities. I didn't want to raise my kids in a city necessarily, which is why we live where we live. But my dream was to then move somewhere where I was the only American in town. I wanted to live in the middle of nowhere, but unfortunately, when getting the call that mom has cancer, it's like, all right, well, that dream has got to be put on hold. So I never really got the chance to leave Rome, but it was amazing. I mean, I met people who I'm still so dear to me to this day. In fact, one of my closest friends, we spent the last 2 out of the last 3 summers hanging out with, and he's a native of a little town outside of Rome, and he's got kids just around my own kids' ages, and
Oh, that's amazing.
yeah, he's a dear buddy of mine. And another dear friend of mine is a guy I met there who lives in London now. I'm going to see him this summer. So it was rad. I mean,
That's
a
awesome.
lot of my early and mid 20s, it was totally wasted on drinking too much. But
So you kind of you talked about music, but were you always joining the record? And it sounded like were you always playing, or because I know you have a band, but like
yeah,
or you
I
did
mean,
have a band, yeah.
yeah, no, I grew up. That was another one of my parents' rules. Very few rules in our house, but you have to go to college and you have to play an instrument. And
Okay, that's a rule. That's awesome.
oh yeah,
Why? Why was that?
I don't know. I don't know why. I mean, I think it's a good rule. I think playing music really kind of rewires how your brain works. It rewires how you kind of approach the world. It's such a valuable tool to learn, and it's going away now with cuts in arts budgets and such.
I know it
Um,
sucks.
it sucks. But I grew up playing the drums. I grew up playing the guitar. Yeah, playing in bands my whole life throughout college. Uh, Always. I've been in. I mean, I'm 41 now, and I've pretty much been in a band consistently since I was like, I don't know, 14. Back then it was like cover bands and stuff, but
Yeah, yeah.
um, started writing my own music, shortly thereafter. And I mean, I'm not like a crazy. I'm not the guy that does all the wicked leads, but I always focus more on like the craft of songwriting, and I don't know if I'm any good at it, but I enjoy it.
I mean, you've toured and stuff. Yeah, I used to play as well, so that was but I'm definitely not as I'm definitely not good anymore. But
No, neither am
so
I.
but so you were you doing that in Rome too, or was that something that
No,
you were
no,
put? No.
no. I mean, my buddy, the buddy I mentioned before, he and I jammed a couple times. One of the first things I did was I went to what is like their kind of, remember Borders, the bookstore?
Yeah, yeah, of course, yeah.
Kind of like their Borders, and I bought like a $50 um, acoustic guitar, real cheap piece of junk, just to have something to kind of fiddle with in the apartment that I lived in. And actually, when I left, I didn't want to bring it home, so I gave it to my buddy, and I'm pretty sure he still has it.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean, just again, always playing. It's a weird thing. I mean, it's kind of therapeutic for me, but also I kind of have a very personal relationship with the guitar. Like I won't really, my family's around, my wife and my kids. Like I'm not really like sitting there like kind of noodling while I kind of have to be alone with it. At the risk of sounding
Yeah.
like a total cheese ball.
No, no, that's
It's
perfectly normal. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really personal time for me. It's for a variety of reasons. But it's yeah. I mean, but we have guitars. I mean, shit, man, we got 4
Look at
guitars in
that.
this. So our house is, and I grew up much in the same way. Like I grew up in a house. My dad is a musician. He's a guitar player, and I grew up in a house that
Go.
was full of guitars, drums, pianos, keyboards. It's just like, I didn't really take lessons. It was just like something that was kind of always around that you just kind of picked up and did.
Yeah. So you came back, you were helping your mom, and then she kind of kicked you out. Like where, what, where did that take you? You went to Jersey City, and then
Yeah,
what you?
Jersey City, not sure what I wanted to do. And then worked for this paper for a little while, and then found that Matador was hiring an intern, and I got that job, and I was the world's oldest intern. I think I was like at that time, because it took me a while to graduate college. I'm old to begin with. I was always like the oldest kid in my high school class, and so when I took that internship, I think I was like I don't know if I was 25, but I was old. I was like way too old to be an unpaid intern. But I was, I was like, well, if this can end up with me working here, like I'll do what I have to do. And at the time, I was working at a bakery in Hoboken, New Jersey, and
Oh
I
wow.
worked at the bakery 5 days a week, and I interned at Matador 2 days a week, and so I was working 7-day weeks. And I think for 9 months, I think I took one day, I took 2 days off. One was my mother's
You were
birthday, and
committed.
yeah, and it was like, and I remember the president of Matador, who today to this day is a friend of mine. He recently told me he was actually at my 40th birthday. We had a big dinner, and then we all went to go see the band Pavement. Um, but he told me, he's like, I remember the first time I met you, you told me that you were going to have to hire me or fire me because that's the only two ways I was going I was to leave. And he said that made an impression on him. So
Oh, that's great.
yeah.
So you're working in Matador. How did you end up and how did you get to New York and meet your wife? And
So that was New York. So Matador was
oh,
was
Matador
is
was in New York. Okay,
Matador
sorry.
has always been based in New York City. I moved from Jersey City into Brooklyn into Killer Apartment, and this was back in '06, '07, I think, when you could still like find a super cheap apartment in
Yeah,
Brooklyn. It changed quickly. It was changing when I moved there,
yeah.
but you could still find that like 3 bedroom for $1,500 or whatever, and you and your buddies. And so yeah, so I moved into Brooklyn, lived in Brooklyn for a couple years before I met my wife. And when we met, I was actually living in Greenpoint, up near
Nice,
McCarran,
rad.
on the Greenpoint side of McCarran Park. Yeah, we were neighbors, man.
Nice.
We were like,
We were
yeah, we were
definitely
like,
neighbors. You probably saw me. I was probably running or pretending to run and do exercise at the park at
oh, I was
McCarran. I
drinking.
love that
Well,
place.
yeah, I was drinking a to-go margarita from the Turkey's Nest while you were
Oh,
exercising.
the
And
good
then
old
yeah,
days. Yeah.
did that for a while. I had a band on the side, and that band started to do okay. We started to get press and radio, and we started to develop a fan base in like New York and New Jersey. And I met my wife in the interim, and she encouraged me. We signed with an independent label, and she's the one
Oh,
who said,
nice.
"I'm going to break up with you if you don't quit your job and go on tour full time." Um, so we did that when we really started. The band released our second record. We all kind of hit the road and hit it hard, man. Hit it for like 200 plus shows a year for many years.
Wait. Sorry, so I don't mean to interrupt, but she says she's gonna break up with you if you don't go on tour and do something with this. Oh, that's sorry. I thought I heard that.
No, yeah, you heard it right. Yeah, you heard it right.
Okay, I was like, okay,
Yeah,
that's
which
that's
is which is
yeah,
part of the reason why I married her. I mean, one of the million
that's so
reasons.
supportive. Yeah,
And her friend, even after we got married, when I would go on tour or when we started having kids, I would do a little bit of touring when our son, we just had the one, he was young. And sometimes, people who knew her would say, like, you Mike's gone all the time. You're okay with that? And she was, her response is always like, I knew who I married. Like, this is the guy that I married, and
yeah,
this is what he does. Like, what do you want me to do? Like, this is how he's happiest. Um, and that's changed now with kids. Now, I mean, I went away last weekend to play one show in Athens, Georgia, and the night before I left, I was like, not quite in tears that I was leaving my kids, but like, and that was
I've
one
been
night.
there.
We used
Yeah.
to do like 6-week tours around the whole country, and one night, 5 hours away, and I was devastated to be leaving my babies. So it's different now.
Oh man. So tell me, I mean, I want to be respectful of your time, and I'd love to just jump more into like being a dad and like what that's been like for you, and like how old, how many kids, and how old are they again?
So I have a son who's 6 and a daughter who's 2.5.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
six
and
and two and a half.
yeah, and Emily had a miscarriage in between there. So our daughter, she's there's a term for it. I think it's rainbow baby, but she's one of those.
Oh,
But
okay, yeah,
she's one of those kids. And I know everybody says this about their kids, but the world is a better place because she's in it. And I often think
oh,
about Emily's miscarriage, and if that second pregnancy had resulted in a baby, we wouldn't have this little, you know, ball of personality that we do now. But yeah, I mean, we had kids on kind of a normal timeline in New York City, um, which means by the time we moved down to Chapel Hill, like we were old because people in New York don't get married before you're 30, and you don't have kids before you're
yeah,
35. That's normal. I feel like LA is
That's
the
right.
same way, you know?
It's the same,
Move,
exact same.
yeah,
Yeah.
move down to Chapel Hill, and everybody my age has, I'm 41. They've got kids who are 10, 12, 15 years old. I'm like, we're just getting started.
I
Um,
know.
yeah. So how old are you? You have two kids? Or?
I have one. It's same as your daughter, 2.5.
Right.
Well, a son, and I have my wife and I we're elder millennials. Let's just. I'm 40 and she's like a year older than me, so it's like
Yeah.
it's definitely we definitely got started a little bit later than the
Which is,
rest.
I wouldn't have wanted to do it any other way because,
Yeah.
I don't regret anything about what I'm missing. And I'm missing a lot. I'm missing, I'm a huge music fan. It's a part of my life. And I don't go to, I'm going to a show tonight. I'm going to see a band
Oh,
called Blonde
nice.
Redhead, who's like one of my favorite bands ever. But I go to maybe one show a month these days, and that's a lot. And
Yeah.
I think if I had done this earlier, there'd be a part of me that would be resentful of fatherhood because but now I'm just like, I did all that. I've done all, I don't need to do it anymore. And if I get to do it, it's great. But, I've played about 5,000 shows in my life. I don't need to play any more shows. Everything else
Yeah.
is kind of a bonus. Um, so
Do you
that's the,
feel like do you feel like the pandemic helped like neutralize a lot of that as well, or do you think it's just age, or do you think it's both, or how do you
I
feel
think a
about?
lot of it, yeah, I think a lot of it does have to do with age. I don't know. I haven't really thought about myself in the scope of the pandemic. I've thought about my son a lot because there's a whole generation of kids who were born and raised in there's plenty of data that says like those first couple of years are the most formative years of your life, and they had those first years in a totally fucked up time. And there's a lot
Yeah.
that we're having a tangle. Like for example, like our son is very spoiled. And it's because we bought him a lot of toys because when he was 2 years old, he couldn't have friends. Like he was stuck inside, you know?
Right.
And so mine and my wife's way of kind of, was to get nothing big, nothing crazy. We'd get him like a Matchbox car, but we would get him like every day because he couldn't have friends. He wasn't allowed to go outside. He wasn't allowed to go to school, to a playground. And so him being kind of spoiled, for lack of a better term, we're having to untangle that now and untie those knots. Um, and so I really think about, what and my son's beautiful. He's a wonderful boy, but it's a weird thing. There's gonna be this micro generation as they get
Yeah.
older. Oh, you were a pandemic baby too. But as far as myself, I don't really know. That's a good question. Much like everything else, I've had kids. I haven't really considered myself. I haven't thought about my.
Yeah, I feel like there was a level of like being in LA and same in New York, it's like FOMO central. And maybe that's just like a me thing, but it was
Oh,
just like you're like, oh yeah, like there's this next thing you could go to, this bar, or this
totally.
restaurant, or this place you can kind of go check out or whatever, and music and whatever. And then yeah, definitely don't miss any of that at all. Like, and I don't know if it was because of the pandemic. I reflect on that a bit. Like, is it because we had kids during the pandemic, or is it because like we're just older and like we don't need that? I did all that. Like, I've traveled the world. Like, I've
Right.
done all these things. Like,
You
I
did
don't
all
need
that.
to like,
You did all that, and
yeah,
we'll do it again someday. Like
yeah,
I was just saying to my wife as I got home from this one show we did last weekend, was like, in 10 years, if I could do that 6 weeks out of the whole year, when our kids are older. But right
yeah,
now, you couldn't pay me enough money to it would have to be a very major band to call my phone and say, hey, come play guitar with us. But um,
yeah.
and again, it's not like you said, like it's not something I regret or miss out on. Like I'd rather be home with my kids.
I definitely think, yeah, I definitely see that a lot. Like, I don't wish that I had, I'm glad I got married when I got married and had kids when I did, like, at the age that I did. Like, I definitely feel like it was, I don't think I could have, I think I wasn't like emotionally also like able to like, I reflect like, oh my God, like you're 20 having a kid. Like, how the hell do you handle
Hmm. I know.
like
I know.
your
My wife
state,
and I,
your needs versus other people, your kids' needs?
totally.
Yeah.
We both, my wife and I both went to college. in Philadelphia, and I always joke that like, thank God we didn't meet in college because it never would have worked out because I was a hell raiser. I was a party animal. I mean, and she is, you know, the polar opposite of that. And if we met then, I mean, we lived, you know, 30 blocks apart from each other in Philadelphia at the same time.
That's funny.
And thank God we didn't meet because it never would have worked out, you know, because, and then,
Would have
yeah,
been
to
tough.
have
Yeah.
kids in that, like, I mean, until about 7 years ago, I was still a baby.
I mean, I still am, but you know, so you're like, you know, you're in the house, you got these two kids, like, so you're also cooking. I mean, is that like, you want to tell me, like, maybe we could talk a bit about that and like how you're
Yeah,
sort of,
yeah.
what do you cook in? How do you cook? Like, yeah, I'd love to hear more about.
So I grew up, like I said, I grew up in a big Italian American household, and I think one thing that changed, you know, the funny thing is that a lot of people will say, and what's your heritage? Am I preaching to the
Heritage
choir?
is, well, yeah, I mean, I'm a first generation from Jordan and Palestine. So
Okay,
Palestinian, yeah,
so
Arab, yeah, similar Mediterranean.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
when people say like people, I'm Italian, it's like, well, no, you're not. You're Italian American. Like, and there is a big, big difference. You know, you're not, you know, and so I grew up, and it's a very big, important distinction that I make as often as, you know, whenever I talk about this stuff. I'm Italian American. I'm not Italian. Like, got
Yeah.
born in New Jersey. One of the big differences in Italian culture and Italian American culture is that in the Italian American culture, the kitchen belongs to the women. Men don't cook where I
Oh,
come from,
interesting.
and it's different in Italy. Men, you know, men very much do cook in, you
Yeah.
know, in the old country. Um, but so growing up, my dad never cooked, never. Um, and it wasn't an overtly. I think there's some kind of implicit sexism, but it wasn't overtly sexist. It wasn't like, you know, I'm not cooking, I'm the man. You know,
Yeah.
it just was the way it was. That's just what happened. On top of that, my mother was a absolutely brilliant cook. And so I didn't really learn how to cook until I was a little bit older. And then I got into college and I was living on my own. And, you know, she taught me a few things that, you know, she used to say, you know, and this is her words, not mine, would help me with the chicks.
Hey man, it does. It works.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when she was dying, and we knew she was dying, that was kind of when I said, like, all right, like, you need to download all this stuff onto me, like, because I can't live without your meatballs. I can't live without your fettuccine alfredo. I need to know how to make this stuff so that I could at least have that kind of connection to you. But even forget a connection to her, so I could taste that. You know, we call it gravy, the Sunday gravy.
Yeah. Yeah.
People call it sauce. We call it gravy. And so it wasn't quite on her deathbed, but it was on her dying bed that she taught me all these things. And as I got older, she showed me a lot of things, and I started cooking, and I found a lot of love in it. And I love it now. And, you know, my wife and I occupy very different places in our kitchen. There is no one who can execute a recipe that I've ever met better than my wife. She'll be on the New York Times with the phone, and she will produce something that looks exactly like the photo.
Yeah.
Whereas me, I'm just like, my mother taught me how to just cook by feel, by smell, by taste. So I couldn't,
Intuition. Yeah.
yeah, totally. And I couldn't tell, you know, people ask me for the recipes sometimes of what I do. And I'm like, how many tomatoes do you use? I'm like, I don't know. You use it. How much salt? Well, enough. And if you didn't use enough, add more. And if you use
Yeah.
too much, don't use that much next time.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, my mother used to say, we don't use no fucking tablespoons with it. You know,
She would drop the F bomb, and was like a.
My mother talked like a trucker. She was brilliant. My mother she graduated from NYU. She had a master's degree in education.
Nice.
You know, she was a very, 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 very intelligent woman, but she did speak like a trucker.
What was it? What was it again? I want to. That was a great. That was awesome. She says no fucking.
We don't use no fucking tablespoons in this shit. We don't use no fucking teaspoon, tablespoon, something like that. She would say something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
and my wife she bakes a lot. Her mother baked a lot, and so for her, like baking is a very precise science, and cooking in a lot of ways isn't. And so I'm kind of
Yeah.
more suited to that, tossing in whatever. And so yeah, I mean, I love it, man. I love to cook. I love to cook for my kids. Um, I make we make Sunday gravy, not as much as we should, but a lot. When I was a kid, it was every Sunday. My mother had a big, pot this tall, um, and I don't do that for whatever reason. I don't want to say I don't have the time. Of course you have the time. It's just how you choose to use your time.
Yeah.
My
So
mother was
so
a
tell
very
me
disciplined.
about. Oh,
So go
sorry,
ahead.
sorry. I mean,
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, yeah. So can we talk a bit about like what the difference between gravy and sauce is? Because I've wanted to like know this.
So as
Get
I
the
understand,
get the. Yeah, go ahead.
totally, if you want a Jersey Italian Americans
Yes,
insight,
yes.
which as far as I'm concerned, that's like asking a NASA scientist how a rocket works. All right. You,
Okay.
uh, you know, like that, that guy, who's the guy, Barstool with the pizza. It's like, guys from Boston.
Portnoy. Yeah, David
I don't want
Yeah.
to hear your opinion on pizza if you're from Boston. I'm sorry. Um, you know, so anyway,
100%.
no, no. So as I understand it, and people have different, I know Italian Americans from Jersey who call it sauce, but as I understand it, sauce does not have meat.
Sauce does not have meat.
Gravy has meat. So
That's so interesting. Okay.
if you're making a marinara, which is tomatoes, olive oil, salt, garlic, and basil, that's tomato sauce. Marinara is tomato sauce. Now, what gets a little bit kind of in the weeds is like, well, then what's a bolognese sauce? Like,
That's where my head was going, was the ground meat. Is that a sauce, or is that gravy?
it's
Or like,
bolognese.
is bolognese.
It's its own
Okay.
thing. But
It's his
gravy,
own.
yeah. When I make gravy, it's marinara first, and then it's pork, meatballs, steaks. We put steaks in there, flank steak, skirt steak. You don't want anything too fatty because that'll kind of mess up the sauce. We do meatballs, which are usually ground beef, and sometimes a mixture of ground beef and ground pork. Um, what else do we put in there? The pork's got to have a bone. I mean, we do use sausage, but we also use pork chop because a lot of
It's
the bone.
quicker. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the bone is where all the good stuff comes from. Um,
So would a
we
gravy would a gravy have multiple meats in it, or is it just one? Do you just
Oh
do
no,
one meat? Like,
it's got all sorts of stuff in there. Yeah, no, this is all in one
so,
pot. I'm not saying like this Sunday we're doing pork chop and next Sunday we're doing sausage. No, no, all of this. So pork chop, sausage, hot sausage, sweet sausage, beef meatballs, beef and pork meatballs, um, pork chop. Did I say that already? Flank steak. Um, I'm
oh
trying
my
to think of what else.
goodness.
Sometimes I use like a stew beef, like those big cubes of beef.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes I'll throw that in there.
Chuck. It's usually chuck there.
Right. And so you cook that long enough, especially the stuff with the meat. And I mean, if you cook it long enough, you'll pull out what was the pork chop, and it's just the bone, and everything else is kind of slid off. But no, that's Sunday gravy is all that stuff. It's all that stuff in one pot. And you look at it, I mean, you kind of think of like a bolognese. It's like brown. It's not really red anymore. Marinara is a red sauce, right? Gravy or bolognese is almost like it looks like rust almost. It's like a brown red kind of, and
Okay.
that's how and then when it's cooking, there's like a thin layer of oil on top that forms. It almost looks like a primordial lake of ooze. That's how you know. That's how you know it's getting good. And then you give it like another 4 or 5 hours, and then it's really good.
So how long does it take to get to the lake of despair
Well,
of
once you
oil?
toss the
Yeah.
meat, you just brown the meat. You don't cook the meat. You brown the meat and you
Okay.
let it cook. You let it cook inside the pot. And I would say once you throw the meat in till the primordial lake, it's probably like 2-3 hours. But you know, it's perfect for a Sunday in the fall if you're a football fan, or in the winter when there's nothing else going on or it's too cold to go outside. And you kind of just let it cook all day. And usually when I'm doing it, I usually wake up I mean, I'm a morning person, which
Same, yeah.
stood in stark contrast to my life in music. But
Yeah,
I wake up at 5 a.m. and on
same,
gravy day,
yeah.
I'll start like right away. So by like quarter after 5, the pot's going. I'm on like my fourth cup of coffee already. And so it cooks from 5 till, I don't know, middle of the afternoon, 2, 3, 4, 5 p.m., maybe 12 hours. And then we put it in the mason jars, throw it in the fridge, give a lot to our friends, and then eat it over the next, week or
What do you
2.
eat it with? Pasta, or is it rice, or mashed
Oh, no,
potato? Like
pasta. Yeah, no, pasta.
pasta, only pasta.
My favorite with gravy is probably penne. Um,
Penne, yeah, that
some people
sounds
do
really good.
spaghetti, but I like the way the penne works with the big chunks of meat. I don't know how many Italian Americans and this is also an Italian thing. This is not just an Italian American thing. Um, that- each sauce has a specific type of pasta. Like you don't make Alfredo sauce with penne. It's like, what are you doing? It's like fettuccine Alfredo. It's not penne
Yeah,
Alfredo. Marinara goes with spaghetti. Spaghetti
yeah,
marinara, spaghetti carbonara, um, linguine with clams. If you made
right.
linguine with clams for a certain type, I'm sorry, if you made spaghetti with clams for a certain type of person, he might get like not offended, but he might ask you, what are you doing here? Like, that said, one of
That's
my favorite
hilarious.
restaurants in town, they make a delicious spaghetti with clams, and it's fantastic.
Okay, so what is your? I know I want to be mindful of your time, but what's your favorite thing outside of gravy that you love to make for your kids, but also your kids love eating? What's the meal?
That's a good question. My kids love like broccolini. They love it.
Ooh.
Like
How do you
my
make
son.
it?
Oh, you put it on a thing, and you put garlic, oil, salt, lemon, and throw it in the. We have like a toaster oven,
Yeah,
or the regular oven, and you bake it for a little while. Um, Again, I don't know how
I make
long.
it the same.
Yeah,
Yeah, I make it the same. Yeah.
yeah, and so I love that, and I love to grill like a perfectly grilled steak. Um, and the kids love that. They love it. So we got. Is
So
that right?
yeah, steak and broccolini. That's a good meal. That's a
Yeah.
very romantic meal as well. Like I
Oh,
made that for Valentine's Day, so a version of that. Yeah,
and it's
it's a
the way I cook steak is you salt it super early in the morning and you let it sit in the fridge all day, and then you put it on super duper high heat, like 600 degrees, and you cook it for 3 minutes on one side, 3 minutes on the other side, and it's done.
Do you like it bloody, or is it a yeah, okay. Yeah, I think because of my East Mediterranean heritage, I have that kind of kebab life, so everything's got to be like medium well done for me. But
Well, that's
I do eat
another
it
thing
if it's good
desperately
meat.
miss about living in New York is the halal cart, man. I can't tell you how like I would kill somebody for chicken and rice right now with green sauce.
It's I do miss that. How I guess in the last couple of minutes, like just like where can people find you? Like how do people know who you are, so I can everyone
Yeah.
can
So
check you out.
the way we connected is through the Substack newsletter that I write called "Being a Dad is Hard as Fuck." I don't know if I mentioned this, but after we talked about this before you started recording. But after transitioning out of music, I now work as a freelance writer, um, and one of the things I do to just kind of occupy my downtime, which there's a lot of when you're a freelance writer, just waiting to be
Yeah.
paid or waiting for edits or whatever. Is I read a Substack called "Being a Dad is Hard as Fuck," and one of the reason here. Let me hold on. I'm not sure exactly. So it's michaelvm.substack.com. So you can find me there or go to my website, therealmichaelvm.com. But the reason I started the Substack was because when Emily was pregnant with our son, I was looking for like all the books that moms get. I was looking for that, but for dads, and it doesn't that literature doesn't exist because everything not
Does
everything.
not.
There are very few select titles that I've found, but everything written for and towards dads, like humor or like how to or like it's just bad dumb shit. It's just because we're as men we're not allowed to kind of express ourselves emotionally, which is terrible. And coming from kind of a punk rock slash DIY kind of world that I came from, it was like, one of the kind of things I've always lived by is like, if something in the world that you want doesn't exist, then you just go make it, right? I mean, it's pretty simple.
Right.
And that's kind of the way I've always approached music, the world, whatever. And so I started the Substack as that, and it's just that. It's my way of normalizing kind of like earnest and honest and heartfelt and emotional talk about fatherhood. I'm not telling you where to find the best baby carrier. Like, I don't know. I don't know that shit. Um, uh, I do know the emotions that I experienced last week when my son was going through something, and so that's what the Substack is about. I try and keep it focused on me as much as possible for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that my children have never consented to this. They've never said, like, yes, you could tell our
Yeah.
story to the whole world. Now, granted, I don't have that many subscribers, but anyone in the world could find this Substack. And so in that regard, it's like, that's always reminding me, like, it's about me. It's about dad. It's not about my kids. It's about what I'm going through. And someone who reads it, like yourself, again, that's how we linked up, or whoever else, is like, they find something in it that they can relate to and say, like, oh, because the one thing I realized about fatherhood and having parenthood, not just fatherhood, and having two kids, is it's fucking lonely, man. Like, it is a
Oh yeah.
lonely, especially in the early stages. And just someone else saying, like, yo, I went through that too. And this, I'm not saying this is what's going to happen to you. There's nothing that bugs me more in the parenting space. And by that, I mean literature all the way down to a conversation at the park. Nothing bugs me more than when somebody says, this is what is going to happen, or this is what you have to do. Because kids are so
Yeah.
different. People are I'm going to tell you what I experienced, and that's it. And maybe you feel it, maybe you don't, but I'm going to tell you honestly, brutally honestly. I'm going to tell you the good stuff, the sad stuff, the hard stuff, the easy stuff. That's another part I love about fatherhood, is being able to tell fathers who are a few years behind me, it's not that hard. It's hard. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. But in a lot of ways, it's the easiest thing I've ever done, because you just have to do what you have to do. And when you think of it that way, it's easy in that way. And sometimes that means staying up all night and not sleeping for days at a time. But there's no secret hack. There's no magic to it. You just fucking do it. And in that way, it's not that bad. And so, because as having been a husband or a partner to a pregnant wife or partner, I don't know if y'all are married.
We are married.
But
Yeah.
yeah, so being a husband to a pregnant partner, you heard them tell her horror stories.
Yeah.
all
day.
all
Yeah.
people, all day. It's all they want to talk about. So, like, I want to tell you, like, yeah, dude, there are horror stories, but there's also this whole other side, and it's the most amazing fucking thing you're ever going to see or do. So, yeah.
I love it. No, and I love the Substack's great. I feel like, to your point, like, I think that I'm increasingly trying to stop using the word should especially as a parent now. You should do this or you should do that. Like, it's a very bad word, I think, because it's about my experience, not but I love the fact that, like, your experiences are not the same as mine, but I feel like there's stuff that I'm like, oh, hey, okay, cool. Like, I actually experienced something similar, or like, especially when you saw like the pregnancy. I read that one where you saw the pregnancy test, and I was like, I was excited. You sounded like super excited. How I read it. I don't
No,
know
yeah,
what
it
report
was.
did you
I
do
mean,
it,
yeah.
but it was like, also like, I also wanted to see the test, the testing, the thing. And yeah, it's just very, like, it's just a very, it's good to see that, like, other people have gone through it, and we're not that unique. I think that's the cool thing, is that our experiences are not that unique. We're actually just, yeah,
It's all the same.
we're
And
all,
being a son to and my sister's a physician as well. So being a son and a brother to doctors, if there's one thing I've learned, is that, like, the grossest thing you can ever describe to a doctor, that doctor has seen like 5 times that day.
yeah,
Like, we go in and we have all these hangups about it. I don't want to tell the doctor I have diarrhea, or that, it's not even close to the grossest thing that person has seen. And in a lot of ways, what we're doing is the same thing. It's like, it's so not unique. But we just, again, as men in America, like we're culturally disallowed from talking about it. Like you'll see,
Yeah.
there's a part in that story about the pregnancy test where I get to where I'm talking about how like I understand why men run out on their families. I'm not saying I agree with it.
I saw
I,
that. Yeah. Yeah.
I did publish that. Yeah, I get it. Like I get it because it's fucking hard, man. And but how dare anyone ever say that? You're suggesting that you run out on your wife? No, I'm not saying that. I would never leave my kids and my wife. I never could
It's
even think about it.
scary. It's super
But I get
scary.
why people do. And if you
Yeah.
asked me before I had kids, I would say no. That's just a weak man who can't step up. Like, and it's just again, these are things that we need to be allowed to talk about and discuss. And I was terrified to have kids, man. I was fucking terrified, um, but I couldn't say that out loud, except to my, to my closest kind of circle. But now, and it's not just me, man. There's a growing crop of other writers on Substack who are writing about this stuff, and
Yeah.
these voices are starting to become more and more common. And I just hope to be a tiny little part of that, and just if someone can read it somewhere in the world and say like, wow, I'm allowed to express these feelings that I have too, then like that to me, that like this Substack endeavor that I'm on is a
Oh,
huge.
I really enjoy it. So keep writing, and we'll have to cook together over Zoom or something, do like a cooking session or something together.
Man,
Make some gravy.
man, I'm happy to show you anytime.
All
Actually,
right.
if you go to my website, there's a whole story about how my mother about making that gravy. But I'll send you a link.
I read it. That's the one that hooked me in. So I definitely, but yeah, we'll have to do something together some more.
I would
But
love to, man.
all right.